You know, what's funny about people, they hear one side of a story and suddenly they're experts on your entire life. Everyone's got opinions about what happened between me and Jackson, but they weren't there for the real story. They didn't see how it all started, how perfect everything seemed before it all went sideways. So let me tell you what actually happened, because I'm tired of letting other people control the narrative. I'm Kenzie. I'm 28, and yeah, I met my now ex-husband at Murphy's Tavern on what was supposed to be just another boring Friday night. I was working this mind-numbing data entry job at the time, spending 8 hours a day staring at spreadsheets and wondering if this was really what my 20s were supposed to look like. My girlfriends dragged me out that night, said I needed to stop moping around about how dead-end my life felt. Jackson was there with some coworkers, and I noticed him immediately. Not because he was the hottest guy in the room, he wasn't, but because he had this intense way of focusing on whoever he was talking to, like they were the only person who mattered. When our eyes met across the bar, that focus shifted to me, and I felt this rush I hadn't experienced in months. He bought me a drink, then another, and by the end of the night, we were exchanging numbers and making plans for dinner the following week. The thing about Jackson that everyone seems to forget is that he wasn't some innocent victim from day one. He was calculating, methodical about everything he did. Even pursuing me felt like a project he'd mapped out in his head. Within 3 months, we were exclusive. 6 months in, he was already talking marriage like it was the obvious next step in some master plan he'd been following. I fell hard because he made me feel like I was the missing piece in his perfectly organized life. But looking back, I think that's exactly what I was to him, just another box to check off his list. We moved fast because that's what he wanted, not because it felt natural. Jackson was the kind of guy who researched engagement rings for months before proposing, who had spreadsheets for wedding planning, who treated our relationship like a construction project that needed to be completed on schedule. He was making good money in project management, had his whole life planned out in 5-year increments, and I was supposed to just slot myself into his timeline without question. When he proposed, I said yes because it made sense on paper. He was stable, responsible, had a decent job and good credit. All my friends were getting engaged, posting their ring photos on Facebook, planning their perfect weddings. But even at our ceremony, I remember looking around thinking, is this really it? Is this what happiness is supposed to feel like? Don't get me wrong, I love Jackson, but loving someone and being satisfied with them are completely different things. The first year of marriage was fine. I guess we bought this cramped little condo that Jackson picked out because it was financially responsible, and I tried to play the happy housewife role. But Jackson had this way of making every decision feel like it was already made before we even discussed it. He'd present me with options he'd pre-approved, like I was a child who couldn't be trusted to make adult choices. When I'd suggest something different, a bigger place, a vacation, even just trying a new restaurant, he'd have a dozen reasons why his way was better. The complaints started small. My job was sucking the life out of me, and I'd come home exhausted and frustrated, wanting to vent to my husband about my day. But Jackson would listen for maybe 30 seconds before offering some practical solution I'd already thought of. Or worse, changing the subject to something about his work. I told him I wanted to quit, maybe try something creative, something that actually mattered. His response, we need the income right now. Not, let's figure out how to make your dreams work, or what would make you happy. Just cold. Practical math about our budget. Then there was our living situation. That condo felt like a prison after a while. All our friends were buying real houses with yards and guest rooms, posting photos of their housewarming parties and backyard barbecues. I'd show Jackson listings online. Beautiful homes we could afford if we just stretched a little. And he'd shoot them all down. Too expensive. Not the right market. Let's wait another year. Always waiting. Always playing it safe while everyone else was actually living their lives. And the sex? Look, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm some kind of expert, but I know what I need. And the same routine 3 times a week wasn't cutting it. Jackson approached intimacy like everything else in his life. Scheduled. Predictable. Efficient. I tried talking to him about it. Tried suggesting we mix things up. But he'd get all defensive like I was criticizing his performance. Where was the passion? Where was the spontaneity? I felt like I was married to my accountant, not my lover. But what really got to me was how he reacted when I suggested we needed more independence in our marriage. I mentioned taking separate vacations sometimes, not because I didn't want to travel with him, but because I wanted to maintain some sense of myself outside of being Jackson's wife. But he acted like I suggested something completely unreasonable. Why would you want to go somewhere without me? Like, the idea of me having experiences that didn't include him was personally offensive. That's when I realized he didn't see me as my own person anymore. I was just an extension of him, another asset he'd acquired and wanted to manage. The girls' nights started because I was suffocating. Sophia had been begging me to come out with her and some coworkers for months, and I finally gave in because I needed to remember what it felt like to be Kenzie, not just Mrs. Jackson. At first, it was innocent enough. Dinner. A few drinks. Nothing crazy. But God, it felt good to laugh again. To flirt harmlessly with bartenders. To feel attractive and interesting instead of like some boring married woman whose biggest excitement was grocery shopping. Jackson would interrogate me every time I came home. Who was there? What did you talk about? Why are you so late? Like he couldn't trust me to have a few drinks with friends without filing a full report. The questions made me feel guilty at first, but then they started making me angry. I was a grown woman, not a teenager with a curfew. If he was so worried about what I was doing, maybe he should have paid more attention to keeping me happy at home. The second time we went out, that's when I met Logan. He was bartending at this place downtown, and he was everything Jackson wasn't. Confident without being controlling. Funny without trying too hard. Spontaneous in a way that made every conversation feel like an adventure. When he made my drink, our hands touched, and I felt this electric shock I hadn't felt in years. Not since the early days with Jackson. Before everything became routine and predictable, Logan and I started talking. Just casual conversation at first. He asked about my life, actually listened to my answers, and when I mentioned I was married, he didn't back off like most guys would. Instead, he said, "He's lucky to have someone like you." But the way he looked at me suggested he thought Jackson didn't appreciate what he had. We exchanged numbers that night, just as friends. I told myself. He was easy to talk to, and I needed someone who understood that marriage didn't mean your personality had to die. Our texting started innocent, funny observations, complaints about work, random thoughts about life. But Logan had this way of making me feel seen. You know, when I'd complain about Jackson's rigid routine, Logan would say things like, "You're too vibrant for that kind of life." When I'd mention feeling trapped, he'd remind me that I was still young, still had time to figure out what I really wanted. He never directly told me to leave Jackson, but he planted these seeds that maybe I was settling for less than I deserved. The third girls' night. I told Sophia and the others I was meeting them at the usual place, but I went to see Logan instead. I told myself it was just friendship. Just someone to talk to who actually cared about my thoughts and feelings. But when he got off work and we sat in his car talking until 3 a.m., I knew it was more than that. He kissed me that night, and I kissed him back. It wasn't planned. It just happened. And for the first time in months, I felt alive again. I felt desired, wanted, like someone actually saw me as more than just a wife and a steady paycheck. After that kiss, everything changed. I started looking forward to my nights out in a way that had nothing to do with my actual girlfriends. I'd tell Jackson I was going to one place with Sophia, but I'd really be meeting Logan somewhere else. It was surprisingly easy to lie. Jackson trusted me completely, never questioned my stories or tried to check up on me. Sometimes I almost felt bad about how naive he was. But then I'd remember how he'd been taking me for granted, how he'd stopped trying to make me happy, and the guilt would disappear. Logan made me feel things I'd forgotten I could feel. When we were together, I wasn't some bored housewife complaining about spreadsheets and mortgage payments. I was exciting. Desirable? Worth pursuing? He'd text me during the day while I was at work, telling me he couldn't stop thinking about me, asking when he could see me again. It was intoxicating after months of Jackson barely looking up from his laptop when I walked in the room. I started getting careless, though staying out later, being more secretive with my phone, putting actual effort into how I looked when I went out. Jackson noticed, of course he noticed, but instead of confronting me directly, he'd make these passive-aggressive comments. "You're getting dressed up a lot for girls' night. You seem different lately. Are you happy with us?" That last question should have been my wake-up call, but instead of seeing it as genuine concern, I saw it as him finally noticing that I wasn't satisfied with our boring life. Too little, too late. The night everything exploded. I told Jackson I was going to some new bar across town with the girls, but really, I was meeting Logan at Murphy's Tavern, the same place where Jackson and I had met years earlier. Maybe that was my subconscious way of trying to recapture what we'd lost. Or maybe it was just convenient. Logan had gotten off work early, and we were having such a good time, laughing and talking, and yes, being affectionate. I felt like myself again. Like the fun, spontaneous woman I used to be before marriage made me feel invisible. I never saw Jackson walk in. One minute, Logan and I were kissing, lost in our own world. And the next minute, Logan was being shoved off his bar stool. I spun around, and there was my husband, his face twisted with rage and hurt, looking like someone had just destroyed everything he believed in. The fight that followed was ugly. Jackson throwing punches, Logan fighting back, me screaming for them to stop. everyone in the bar staring at us like we were some trashy reality show. When the police showed up, I knew my double life was over. There was no explaining this away, no story that would make this okay. The ride home was silent. Jackson wouldn't even look at me, just gripped the steering wheel so tight I thought he might break it. When we got to the condo, I tried to explain, tried to make him understand that it wasn't about not loving him. It was about feeling alive again, feeling wanted and appreciated. But he wasn't hearing any of it. He kept asking how long it had been going on, how many times I'd lied to him, whether I'd slept with Logan. That last question stung because it showed how little he thought of me, like I was just some cheating slut instead of a woman who'd been neglected and taken for granted. I tried to tell him that Logan meant nothing compared to our marriage, that it was just about feeling appreciated for once. But Jackson looked at me like he didn't even know who I was anymore. You lied to my face. He kept saying, you looked me in the eye and lied, like he'd never told a white lie in his entire perfect life. I reminded him of all the times I'd tried to talk to him about feeling unhappy, feeling ignored, but he'd been too comfortable in his routine to really listen. This wasn't just about Logan. This was about years of feeling like I didn't matter, like I was just part of the furniture in our boring little life. When I woke up the next morning, Jackson was already gone. He'd taken some clothes and left a note saying he was staying with Caleb and that I should expect to hear from his lawyer. No discussion, no attempt to work things out, just immediate nuclear option. I called him crying, begging him to come home so we could talk like adults, but he wouldn't answer. When he finally did pick up, his voice was cold, distant, like he was talking to a complete stranger. I'm done, Kenzie. I can't trust you anymore. Like trust was something that couldn't be rebuilt. Like our entire marriage meant nothing compared to one mistake. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Jackson's lawyer painted me as some kind of serial cheater. Like my relationship with Logan was part of some pattern of deception. They made it sound like I'd been planning this affair for months. Like I'd married Jackson just to use him while I looked for someone better. That wasn't true. I'd loved Jackson. I tried to make our marriage work. But when someone stops seeing you, stops appreciating you, stops making you feel desired, what are you supposed to do? Just accept a lifetime of feeling invisible. The worst part was how everyone took his side. Mutual friends, even some of my own family, acted like I was this terrible person who destroyed a good man. Nobody wanted to hear about how lonely I'd been, how neglected I'd felt, how many times I'd tried to communicate my needs only to be dismissed or ignored. They just saw the cheating wife and the betrayed husband. Like our marriage was some fairy tale that I'd ruined with my selfishness. Even my own mother said she was disappointed in me, like she'd forgotten what it felt like to be young and want passion in your life. 2 years after the divorce was finalized, I thought I'd be in a better place. I thought being free from that suffocating marriage would give me the excitement and spontaneity I'd been craving. But life has this cruel way of teaching you lessons you don't want to learn. Logan, who'd been so attentive and passionate when I was married, suddenly became distant once I was available. Turns out, the thrill for him was the chase, the forbidden nature of our relationship. Once I was just another single woman, I wasn't nearly as interesting. I had to move back in with my mother because I couldn't afford rent on my salary alone. Jackson kept the condo. Apparently, adultery doesn't look good in divorce court, and I was back to living like a teenager at 30 years old. My mom didn't say much, but I could feel her judgment every time she looked at me. She'd loved Jackson, had always said he was good for me, and now I was proof that she'd been right all along. Work became unbearable. Word had gotten around about my divorce, and suddenly I was the office cautionary tale. Married women would stop talking when I walked by, like infidelity was contagious. The few single women treated me like competition, like I was some desperate divorcee who'd steal their boyfriends. I applied for other jobs, but my heart wasn't in it. Everything felt pointless. Then I saw the Facebook post that shattered whatever was left of my pride. Jackson had gotten engaged. To someone named Emma, a woman I'd never heard of, but who looked like the complete opposite of me. Quiet. Sweet. The kind of woman who probably thought a wild Friday night was staying up past 10 p.m. to watch a movie. The ring was gorgeous. Bigger than the one he'd given me, and the caption made me sick. Found my forever person. Can't wait to build a life with someone who truly appreciates what we have. The comments were full of congratulations and people saying how happy he looked, how he deserved this after what he'd been through. But the real slap in the face came when I saw the photos from their engagement party. There was Jackson, looking healthier and happier than I'd seen him in years. He'd lost weight, updated his wardrobe, even changed his hairstyle. This was the man who used to come home exhausted every night, who claimed he was too tired for romance or adventure. Apparently, he'd just been too tired for me. The worst part, seeing all our old friends in those photos, celebrating his new beginning like I'd never existed. People who used to invite us to dinner parties and game nights, who'd claimed they wanted to stay neutral during the divorce. They'd chosen sides after all, and it wasn't mine. Even Sophia was there, the same friend who'd encouraged me to go out and have fun. Now acting like she'd never known me? Fine. Yeah, I cheated. I lied to his face, and I got caught red-handed at the same bar where we met. But he pushed me to it with his constant need to control everything. His inability to see me as anything more than another item on his to-do list. I tried to tell him I was unhappy, tried to get him to pay attention to what I needed. But he was too busy managing our lives like a business transaction to notice his wife was dying inside. And now he gets to play the victim while I'm the villain in everyone's story. He gets the sympathy, the support, the fresh start with some perfect little woman who'll probably never challenge him or ask for more than he's willing to give. Meanwhile, I'm starting over at 30, living with my mother, working the same dead-end job I was trying to escape when I married him in the first place. But you know what? I'm not sorry I wanted more. I'm not sorry I refused to settle for a life that felt like slow death by routine. Maybe I went about it the wrong way, but at least I tried to find something real, something passionate, something that made me feel alive. That's more than most people can say about their marriages. They just sleepwalk through their lives, accepting whatever scraps of affection they get, never demanding the love and excitement they actually deserve. So yeah, I'm the cheating ex-wife who destroyed a good man. That's the story everyone wants to believe. But the truth is messier than that. The truth is that sometimes good people make bad choices when they're drowning in a life that doesn't fit them anymore. And sometimes the person you thought was your soulmate turns out to be just another stranger who never really knew you at all.